I am graduating medicine and scored marks at the top of the cohort over the last 5 years. And these are some of the action points and rules for success in med that I think are best applied across the journey, which will help you. All right. Firstly, start by understanding the specifics. Whoops. Understand the principles, memorize the specifics. So there's so many niche facts, things you need to remember, random names, random stats or things that come up on the exam. I think shelve all the memorization and try and understand the core, like what are the basics? If you can understand that really well, then you don't need to like flashcard learn them or whatever. Make them into some sort of story, be able to teach them, and just focus most of your time on the basic principles, the things that endure across many cases, the basic rules. Then, if you need to learn some specific thing, then you can add it on top of that. So start with the basics and then get the specifics later. But what you'll generally find is once you get a good understanding of the basics, it's easy to understand the specifics, which prevents the need to just randomly memorize things anyway. There are some times I think it's useful to memorize like random things. If you're expecting some niche question about the Krebs cycle on your exam, sure, that might be something that's a simple Anki card. But don't waste time just memorizing like bunches of sheets of information, especially things that are too detailed. Like no one's going to ask you about the aberrant artery in the renal system, whatever. So understand as much as possible. Focus most of your time understanding the basics, a bit of time understanding the specifics, and then whatever's needed to memorize on top of that can be overflow. Number two, the ability to teach is a good proxy for knowledge. So if you think you know something, don't just say, all right, I feel good with this. Don't rely on that feeling. Try teaching it to a wall, to a teddy bear, to a friend. When you teach it, you will be aware of what you know, but also what you don't know. Anticipate, like ask a friend to like ask you a couple of follow-up questions or ask follow-up questions of yourself, and you'll see how quickly you reach the limits of your knowledge. And that gives you good awareness of what you know and how well you know it, probably better than you could just get by gut feel. Number three, time to think breeds curiosity. I think throughout my years of med, it was just pounding on getting information in. You know, you podcast on the drive to hospital, then you go to hospital, then you podcast on the way back, and you go, you're studying at home. There's no free time for your mind to roam. And that, I think, reduces some of, or like prevents the ability just to like ask random curious questions or like be interested in more niche topics. Um, and I recently just went on a 2 week hike, and that time without your phone, basically, I was asking of myself a completely different set of questions, things I wouldn't be interested in normally when I'm o more overstimulated. So I was interested in, like geology and what made these rock formations form, and where does the wind come from, and what makes a valley versus a mountain. And yes, that's there in the scenario that I'm in, but I think giving yourself some time to think will increase the natural curiosity you have toward the topic and make things more enjoyable, rather than simply pounding yourself with information, which is good for like learning a lot, but doesn't necessarily make it as enjoyable and limits your learning to, I think, the more conventional, like basic things, rather than being curious about the extras. Start early, learn slowly, and ask why. So doing some low-level practice, low-level learning on the holidays, I think is completely beneficial. Learn slowly. So when I say that, don't rush the learning phase. When you're actually trying to understand it, ask questions. Don't have this "I want to learn one condition every 10 minutes" mentality. Ask as many questions, do as much research as you can, as long as it takes. That initial learn is when you're creating that story for yourself. And the more you learn, the more you fit into that coherent storyline, the better things will stick and the less you'll have to review. Yes, we want to learn effectively. We want to um, create strategies that allow us to learn as fast, as much as possible in a set period of time, but don't rush the learning process. Go and allow your natural curiosity and interest to dictate when you're done with learning a particular topic. Attention is the most important force multiplier in learning. So, whatever you're doing, whenever you're learning, try and pay deep attention to that task. If you're in a lecture, one thing that will reduce your attention is how distracted you are when you're writing notes. Even writing notes is a distractor from the lecture. When you're listening to someone, try and pay deep attention to them. If you pay deep attention, you will retain that information better. The second most important force multiplier is passion. If you are passionate about this topic, if you find med interesting, if you find it engaging, it will be so much easier to find consistent time to study, for things to stick in your head, to remember niche facts, to be excited and energetic about learning, and figure out what cultivates your passion. And I think that fits in, a bit of time to think will help with that cultivation of passion. Act on passions immediately. So this is really on anything, but whenever you feel motivated, use that, and act on it immediately. There are times I'm motivated to make a YouTube video, and then 2 hours later, I'm not motivated anymore. So you might only have a 1 hour window to act on something. You Often there's times where you're interested in a particular topic or a particular specialty for a couple of weeks, and then you're not anymore. So when you have these short bursts of interest, learn as much as possible. Go with it. Allow yourself just free rein on information and learn as much as you can. Because when you're not interested, it's a lot harder to have that same drive, you know? And this goes for things outside of med as well. If you're interested in physics, coding, whatever it may be, if you have this period of interest, act soon and learn as much as you can. Learn from the experts. We are blessed in medicine because doctors are the experts in learning content and applying it. They are lifelong learners. That's what, if you say lifelong learning, what's a career? Everyone will think of medicine. So ask your supervising doctors, the doctors on placement, how are they studying? Ask your tutors, how did they learn? How would you suggest to learn this? But also, your peers, the people in med with you, are experts in studying. These are the best learners and brightest minds. I've met the most incredible people in medicine, and most of my study strategies has come from people in my cohort. I've probably learnt more from them than from YouTube, and there's lots of good people on YouTube, Ali Abdal, etc. But all these people, you have so much a wealth of knowledge on how to learn and incorporate all of that into your style. Every conversation I have, I try and come up with an action point. Additionally, the tools doctors use. Systematic thinking is one of the most powerful models, mental models from medicine, which basically just says, come up with categories for things, and then you can systematically go through those categories so you don't miss things. So, for example, if I'm coming up with like this video content, what tips would I give for studying medicine? I can just come up with 12 random tips, or I can break it down. What are my tips for learning content? What are my tips for practicing exams? What are my tips for, the future of medicine in general? And if you come up with categories, it'll just make sure you don't miss anything. It'll make it a lot easier to have high quality content and to have more breadth of ideas as well. Maximize time in the interesting and effective quadrant. So if we have a sort of plane where things can be, effective or ineffective, and things can be interesting or boring, you want as much time in here as possible. Now, if it's interesting and ineffective, that might be all right, If you really like documentaries, that's probably really interesting, but it's not the most effective way of learning that content. But then they also do stick quite nicely. Similarly, effective and boring is okay. For me, it's pretty boring to, just do like spaced repetition on my Notion. I find that pretty boring, but it's effective. But for everything, think, is this effective? Is this interesting? And if something is both effective and interesting, you want to do as much of that as possible and spend as much time in that quadrant as possible, even though, quadrants 2 and 4, it's pretty reasonable to spend some time in there too. But avoid quadrant 3. All right, retention comes from repeated exposure. We have to get rid of the expectation that you would just learn something once and it will stick forever. Some things do, and it's worthwhile thinking about why that is. Why you can have some sort of experience once or hear something once and remember it forever. And it's really fascinating when you work out the different reasons why. But for most things we learn, for things that come up on exams, you're going to have to look at them a few times before you sit the test. You're going to have to be tested on them a few times for them to actually stick. So that's just about managing expectations. Turn passive learning into active learning. Any part of your study strategy that's passive, you need to ask, can I make this as active? Can I take reading my notes into, asking myself some questions about it, answering, and then looking to see my notes? Can I take simple review of a chapter to, you know, or reading a textbook to doing some practice questions and doing some pre-made Ankies to see like what do I know, what do I not know about this topic? So at any stage where you're doing passive learning, just ask, can this be made active? Givers beat matchers. This is an idea I got from a Adam Grant book, which basically just said like the the top performing students in med are the people who also like give. They help others. They create resource for others. They're not simply the ones who match. If someone does something good for them, then they match and also do something good back. So it's easy to, take the year 12 sort of competition mentality and apply it to uni. But the more you give, the more you help other people, the better it will be for you. The more you teach others, that will pay off and actually help your own learning as well. So there's many good reasons to be a giver. All right, finally, learning for exams does not equate to learning for life. There's things that are relevant to life that are not relevant to exams. There's things that are relevant to exams that are not relevant to life. But you need to be good at exams because like to progress to any stage of the doctor requires passing of some increasingly difficult exams. So the common things that need to be stressed. The most important thing is the STEM. Even if you look through like Daniel's mistakes document, half of that is just pay attention to the STEM, pay attention to the STEM. And half of my mistakes I missed this in the STEM. I overvalued this in the STEM, my answer fit with some of the STEM, but not all of it. So once I pick an answer, use all the information in the STEM to scrutinize that answer. But the STEM is the key. That is like the 80-20 rule. That is the 80% to focus on. Acknowledge your own biases. When I'm studying or when I'm doing an exam and I pick something, sometimes, I only pick this because of this reason, or I only pick this because of that last sentence, or I only pick this because, the first thing I thought about was appendicitis, and then I haven't really thought to change my mind since. So if there's any biases that that you can catch yourself falling into, then you can manage that. But learning the buzzwords just makes your marks go so much higher. Learning the common patterns. Yes, there's direct buzzwords, but there's also triads or there's also constellations of symptoms. If you can match like the patterns, learn the patterns. That's a better word than buzzwords because that can be applied even more broadly. When you're looking at the answers, don't just simply say, I think the answer is C and move on. Try and explain to yourself why is it not A, B, D, E? What are the difference between those? And that's more active revision to augment the practice questions, and then come up with the best revision strategies possible. Anytime you make a mistake, you need some sort of active action point, be that flashcard, mistakes document, etc. As long as you spend as much time with active recall and spaced repetition, you'll end up improving dramatically. There's many more things I could have talked about, but if you have any questions about all this, I'd love to hear it. And if you enjoyed this, there's many more videos about studying in medicine across this channel. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and yeah, feel free to go ham and check it out to your heart's content. Thanks, guys.